In this video, I'm going to introduce MySQL. What we're going to learn how to do is create tables and also how we can write code which queries the database to return certain data to us. Now, we're not going to do anything too complicated. We're going to do just enough to make our website so we can gather user information. Now, the first thing you need to do is get into MySQL Workbench. If you try to log in, you might often see this error occur. So it might try to log into the database and you might see this error that says cannot connect to the database server. This is because the database isn't on. Now to turn it on, all you need to do is go into Task Manager. So to get into Task Manager, right click the bottom taskbar and then click Task Manager. Once it's open, click on the Services tab and look for MySQL. So you can see for me, the MySQL service is stopped. Right click on it and click Start. Now this will happen from time to time where you'll just have to come in here and turn it on before you'll be able to access your local MySQL server. Now once it says running, you will be good to connect to your database. Now once it's logged into your database, you should see something a little bit like this. It might be a bit different. You might not see a list of schemas on the left. It might just be blank. If you don't see this tab at all, just click View and then Panels and then Show Sidebar. Should say Show Sidebar up there. And then this Schemas tab will open. Now basically what this list is showing is it's showing a list of all the databases or schemas that I have stored on my computer right now. A schema is basically just a set of tables. So if we have a look inside of the ABS schema, you'll see that I have 3 tables within it. So the idea is that we would create a schema for each project that we're working on. If we were working on 2 separate websites that depended on separate data, we'd create 2 separate schemas for them. Now what we're going to do first is we're going to make our own schema. So I'm going to right click in this white space anywhere. I'm going to click Create Schema. And we just have to choose a name. I'm going to match it up with our project. I'm going to call it Simple Site. Okay, we'll click Apply. And you'll see MySQL Workbench will automatically generate the MySQL code which will create the schema. We don't have to worry about it. We just press Apply and it'll be executed. And now we'll see our schema over here on the left. If we want to add a table, we just have to right click the Tables section and then click Create Table. Now on our website, we are going to need a table to store all of the supporters or the users that sign up or complete this form. So let's just look at the form and we need to try and design our table to store all of the information within it. So we're going to need something to store the user's name, their email address, their age range, and their motivation. Now, before we start trying to program our database, I think it might be helpful to try and visualize the data we would like to capture from this form. So what I've done is I've opened up Excel and I've made this very simple table. And basically every column in this table represents one of the data inputs in our form. So you can see that I've created a column for the name, the email, the age range, and the motivation, but I've also created an extra column for the ID. So I've assigned every user who signs up a unique identification number. Now we need to try and figure out a way to program our MySQL database to store this information. Now we can do the same kind of thing. We can decide what the column names would be, but MySQL isn't as flexible as Excel in that we need to actually specify what data type will be stored within each of these columns. So for example, in the ID column, we're storing numbers or integers. In the second column, name, we're storing text, but maybe we want to limit the length of the text. We don't want somebody to put in a name that's 1,000 characters long. Same as the email, and the motivation might be open-ended. It's text, but maybe we want people to put in as much text as they want. Now the last one is the age range. You'll see that the way that I've specified the age range is just by writing down the first age within a given age range. Now, this is just one way we could have done it. We could have assigned another identification letter or number to each age range and then stored that, but I just thought that this would be the easiest. Okay, so what we need to do is try to program this into our MySQL table. So when we go over to our table and when we go to create it, so I'll go right click, create table again, we're going to make a new table called users. And this table is going to represent all of the users in that spreadsheet that I just showed you. So what we needed to do first is we needed to make an ID. So I'll just call that column ID. The data type stored inside of that column was an integer, it was a whole number. Now you can see that as I wrote that first column, it's automatically checked the PK and the NN columns. PK means primary key. That basically means that the ID is unique to each user, and this will be the column that we'll use to identify each of the users in this table. NN means not null, which basically means that we cannot have an ID that's empty, that's nothing. And I'm also going to check this one over here called AI, automatic increments, which will automatically increment the ID. So every time we create a user, the ID will go up by 1. So the first user's ID will be 1, the second one will be 2, and so on and so on. And this is neat because we don't have to write any code. It'll do it automatically for us. All right, let's add in some other columns. The next column was name. What we'd like to store inside of the name is characters or words, and the data type we'll use is varchar. So this basically allows us to store characters or words, and we can also specify the limit, so the maximum number of characters that it will store. I'm going to put 100 for the name. Now, if we were to try and store somebody's name that was more than 100 characters, what the MySQL database will do is it'll just truncate it. It'll cut off all the extra letters and just ignore them. Let's do the same for email. We'll do a varchar 100. And then what's next? The age range. We'll go age underscore range. And we said that would be an integer. So I'll just write in an int here. Because we're storing the first number within the age range. And the last one was the motivation. Now, we want the motivation to be open-ended. We don't want to limit it to 100 or 255 characters. So I'm going to choose a different data type here. I'm going to choose text. Okay, and that basically allows us to store as much text as we want. There's no limit. Now, the last one I want to add, I didn't mention it before, is I want to add another column that keeps track of when that user was created. So I'll call that column created, and I'm going to give this a data type that represents a date and a time, and it's called a datetime data type. So it's just going to basically be the date and then a space and then the time that they registered. Now, I'd also like the database to keep track of this created date time for me so that I don't have to manually write code to constantly update the date time every time a user registers. And the way I can do that is I can give this column a default value. And the default value I'd like to give it is a current timestamp. So that's basically going to generate the current timestamp, which means the current date and the current time. And every time we create a new user, it's going to automatically store it inside of the created column. Okay, so now we've got our table complete. We can create it by clicking apply. Now you'll see that MySQL Workbench has automatically generated all of this code, and this is the code that will create the table for us. You can see there's all of our column names, and there's the corresponding data types. And if we assign rules to them, you'll see the rules there as well. Let's click apply. And if we have a look in our simple site schema on the left here, if we open up the tables tab, you'll see that you have your users table there in that list. If you want to see what's inside of it, just right click on the users table and click select rows. What this will do is it'll open up a new tab in MySQL Workbench with some automatically generated code. And what this code does is it selects everything from the users table. Now at the moment, you'll see that there's nothing returned by this query. The way we can execute it is pressing the lightning bolt, and every time we execute it and query the database, it's returning nothing. And that's because there's nothing in our table yet. Now what we can do is we can add things into our table just by filling out these little fields down here. So for example, I can make the user Daniel, I can put in an email address, I can put in an age range, a motivation, and notice that I haven't put in anything else because ID and created should be automatically populated by the database. If I want to save it, I just go to the bottom again, I press apply. You can see again MySQL Workbench has generated the code to insert into the users table, into these columns, the values of these. If we want to do it, we press apply. And now when we query the database, you can see that we have a user in there. I just quickly paused the video and I added in the rest of the users in our sample table. And now you can see when I query the database, I have 5 users. Now before we stop, I just want to show you one way we can extend on this query so that, for example, we find all the users whose age range is greater than 26. All we need to do is we need to change this query slightly so that we limit it to an age range greater than 26. And the way we apply constraints is we add on to the end of the query the word where, and then we say age range is greater than 26. Now before I execute it, let's just check to see what we expect to happen. There is only one user whose age range is greater than 26. That's James. So I would hope that when I press the execute button, it would show me just that one user. So let's have a look. And there you go, it only shows that one user. In the next video, I'll explain in more detail how these queries work, and maybe we'll do some more complicated examples.